The morning sun slipped gently through the large windows of a quiet mansion on the edge of town. The house was peaceful, filled with the faint scent of fresh flowers and the distant hum of birds outside. Inside, the sound of a piano echoed softly through the hall. A wealthy woman sat at the grand piano in the living room, her fingers moving gracefully over the keys as if they had known the instrument forever. She played not for anyone else, but simply because music had always been her comfort. It filled the empty spaces of her big house and reminded her of her younger days, when she dreamed of being a concert pianist. In the corner of the room, her maid was busy dusting the shelves and fixing the curtains. She was a quiet woman who worked hard and spoke little. Every day she came early and left late, never complaining, never missing a single task. Her small son often came with her after school because she couldn't afford to leave him anywhere else. He was a polite boy, quiet like his mother, and always kept himself busy with a small notebook or a toy. But today was different. While the rich lady played her piano, the boy stood still near the doorway, completely captivated. His eyes followed her hands as they glided across the keys. He didn't understand the notes, but something about the sound felt magical. It was as if the whole world slowed down around him and all he could hear was the music. He didn't move, didn't blink, just listened. The lady noticed him after a few minutes and smiled softly. "Do you like the sound?" she asked in a gentle voice. The boy looked shy, unsure if he was allowed to answer. He nodded slowly. "It's beautiful," he whispered. She laughed lightly and turned back to the piano. "Would you like to try?" she asked again. The maid froze in surprise, turning to her employer. "Ma'am, please, he doesn't know anything about it." "He'll spoil it," she said quickly, afraid the boy might touch something expensive. The lady waved her hand kindly. "It's all right. It's just a piano, not a crown jewel." She smiled at the boy again. "Come here, dear. Don't be shy." The boy hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward carefully. The piano looked enormous up close, shining like polished gold under the light. He climbed onto the small stool and stared at the black and white keys in awe. The lady guided his small hands to the center of the keyboard. "Press any key," she said. He touched one key gently. A soft sound filled the air. His eyes widened. He pressed another, then another, listening closely to how each note sounded. The lady chuckled at his curiosity. "That's how it begins," she said warmly. "One note at a time." The maid stood silently nearby, feeling nervous but also oddly touched. Her son looked happier than she had seen him in a long time. He wasn't playing with toys, wasn't running around. He was listening, learning, exploring. When they left that evening, he couldn't stop talking about the piano. He told his mother he wanted to play again, even if only for a few minutes. The next day, while his mother worked, the boy quietly wandered into the music room again. The lady wasn't there, but the piano stood open. He didn't touch it at first. He just looked at it. The instrument seemed alive somehow, calling to him. Finally, he reached out and pressed a few keys. The sound made him smile. He started pressing more, trying to copy the melody he had heard the day before. His small hands fumbled and he made plenty of mistakes, but he didn't care. He was lost in the sound. When the lady entered the room unexpectedly, he jumped in fear and quickly pulled his hands away. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he stammered. "I didn't mean to—" But she stopped him with a kind smile. "Don't apologize," she said softly. "You're not hurting anything. Play what you were playing." He looked uncertain. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I was just trying to remember what you played yesterday." "Go ahead," she said. "Let's see what you remember." He placed his fingers back on the keys and began pressing them one by one. The melody came out broken and uneven, but somehow it was recognizable. The lady leaned forward, surprised. "You remembered this by ear?" she asked. He nodded shyly. "I just remembered the sound," he said quietly. Her eyes softened. "That's quite special," she said. "You have a good ear. Not everyone does." She sat beside him on the bench and began showing him how to place his fingers correctly. The boy watched closely, mimicking her movements. His mother peeked through the doorway, unsure if she should stop them. But the look on her son's face held her still. There was something in his eyes, a spark, a kind of focus she hadn't seen before. From that day on, the lady began to let him spend a few minutes at the piano every time his mother came to work. Sometimes she would sit beside him and teach him a short tune. Other times she would let him explore freely. He learned fast. Within a week he could play simple melodies without help. His tiny fingers moved more confidently, his face glowing every time he got a note right. The maid felt both grateful and worried. One evening, she quietly told her employer, "Ma'am, please don't let him bother you. I don't want him to be a trouble." The lady shook her head kindly. "He's not a trouble," she said. "He's a joy. You should see the way his face lights up when he plays. You must let him continue." The mother hesitated. Life had not been easy for her. She had spent years working long hours, facing people's looks and judgments just to provide for her son. She didn't want him to dream of something they could never afford. But when she saw how happy he was, she decided not to stop him. Days turned into weeks, and the boy's bond with the piano grew stronger. Every afternoon after finishing his homework, he would rush to the music room, his small hands eager to play. The lady began to notice something remarkable. He wasn't just repeating what he heard. He was creating. He would combine notes in new ways, hum quietly, and find melodies that no one had taught him. One day she asked him, "How did you think of that tune?" He shrugged innocently. "It just came into my head," he said. She smiled, but inside she felt something deep stirring, a sense that this boy was not ordinary. She decided to bring in a small notebook and started writing down what he played. Some of the melodies were raw and simple, but there was beauty in them, a kind of emotion that couldn't be taught. It was as if he played from the heart, not from memory. One afternoon, she invited a friend over, a retired piano teacher who used to teach at the local conservatory. She wanted an opinion, just to be sure she wasn't imagining things. When her friend arrived, the lady asked the boy to play something he had learned. He sat nervously on the stool and began playing a tune he had made up the day before. The teacher listened silently, arms crossed, expression serious. When the boy finished, she turned to the lady and whispered, "How long has he been playing?" "Barely 2 months," the lady said quietly. The teacher looked astonished. "That's impossible," she said softly. "He plays like he understands the music, not just the notes." "That's something rare." The lady smiled proudly. "I thought so too," she replied. When the teacher left, the boy looked up shyly. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. The lady shook her head. "No, dear," she said gently. "You did something wonderful." That evening, when the maid came to collect her son, the lady took her aside. "He has a gift," she said firmly. "Please don't stop him. Let me teach him more. I'll handle everything." The maid's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to say. She had never imagined someone from such a different world would care so much about her child. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." That night, as they walked home, the boy couldn't stop talking about the piano. "I think I can make my own song one day," he said excitedly. His mother smiled, though her heart felt heavy. She wanted to believe that dreams could come true for someone like her son, but life had taught her to be cautious. Still, she let him dream. Back in the mansion, the lady sat at her piano again. She began to play the same melody the boy had created earlier. It was simple, pure, and strangely moving. As she played, she realized that sometimes talent comes from the most unexpected places, and that maybe, just maybe, this boy's gift could change not only his life but hers, too. The story of a kind gesture had become something deeper, a small spark that would soon grow into a flame. Neither of them could have imagined days passed quickly. After that first discovery, and soon, playing the piano became the happiest part of the boy's life. Every afternoon, as soon as his mother started her chores, he would quietly walk to the music room and wait. The rich lady always greeted him with a gentle smile, sometimes handing him a small piece of chocolate before they began. It had become a little tradition between them, music and chocolate, laughter and learning. At first, she taught him how to read simple notes. She showed him how each symbol on the page matched a sound on the keys. The boy struggled at first, mixing up lines and spaces, but he never gave up. Whenever he got something wrong, he would laugh softly and try again. The lady admired that about him and his patience and focus. He wasn't like most children who grew restless. He was quiet, but his eyes were full of curiosity. After every short lesson, she would let him play freely. That was when she saw his true gift. He could take any tune he heard, no matter how complex, and find the right notes by ear. It amazed her. Once she hummed an old lullaby from her childhood, a melody her late mother used to sing. Within minutes, the boy began playing it perfectly, filling the house with that forgotten song. She sat still, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. It was as if he had brought her memories back to life. From that moment, she knew she had found something rare. This wasn't just a child with interest. He had real talent, something that came from deep inside. The lady began spending more time with him, even rearranging her schedule so she could teach him longer. The maid often looked uneasy, afraid her son might be taking too much of her employer's time, but the lady always reassured her with kindness. One day, after finishing his short practice, the lady said gently, "You learn so fast. Has anyone ever taught you anything musical before?" The boy shook his head. "No, ma'am," he replied softly. "But sometimes when I hear things, I can see the sound in my head. I don't know how to explain it." She tilted her head curiously. "See the sound?" she repeated. "Yes," he said, his eyes wide with honesty. "It's like colors. When you play something soft, it feels light. When it's loud, it feels dark. I just know where it should go." The lady felt chills down her arms. She had met many musicians, even professionals, but few described music like that. He didn't think in rules or techniques, and he felt the music. It came naturally, like breathing. She began writing notes about his progress in a small journal she kept near the piano. Every day she wrote what new thing he learned, what songs he played, and how he reacted. It wasn't just about music anymore. She wanted to remember every step of this boy's journey. A few weeks later, she decided to take him to a small music store in town. The maid was nervous, unsure if it was appropriate, but the lady insisted it was fine. She wanted the boy to choose his own beginner's book and see more instruments. When they arrived, the boy's eyes widened at the sight of so many pianos, guitars, and violins. It was like a treasure world. He walked around quietly, touching the shiny surfaces with wonder. The shopkeeper smiled and asked, "Is this your student?" "In a way, yes," the lady replied warmly. "He's learning quickly." The boy sat at a display piano and began pressing keys. Soon, he started playing one of the songs he had practiced at home. People in the shop began to stop and listen. His fingers were small, but the sound was beautiful, soft yet full of feeling. When he finished, everyone clapped. The shopkeeper looked impressed. "He's gifted," he said. "You don't hear music like that from beginners." The lady smiled proudly, but the boy simply looked down, shy and humble. He didn't seem to realize what he had just done. Back at the mansion, things began to change. The boy now practiced every day with more confidence. Sometimes the lady would play beside him, turning their lessons into small duets. The sound of their music filled the house like sunlight. Even the staff paused to listen. The maid often stood near the doorway, hiding her tears as she watched. It was a joy she never thought she'd experience, seeing her son do something so beautiful. One evening, the lady decided to test how far the boy could go. She played a complex classical piece, one with fast runs and tricky chords. The boy listened carefully, his eyes fixed on her hands. When she stopped, he asked if he could try. She laughed softly. "This one is very difficult," she warned. "I'll try," he said simply. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The notes came slowly at first, uneven and hesitant. But then something shifted. His fingers found the rhythm, his ear remembered the flow, and soon he was playing sections of the song almost perfectly. The lady stared in disbelief. It was impossible for someone who had never studied professionally to pick up that piece so quickly. Yet here he was, doing it naturally. When he finished, the room fell silent. The lady didn't speak for a few seconds. Then she said softly, "You're not just talented. You're something extraordinary." The boy looked confused. "I just like the way it sounds," he said quietly. That night, the lady couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about him, about how life had placed such a gift in a child who might never have discovered it if she hadn't invited him to touch the piano that day. She realized it was no longer enough to teach him casually. He needed real training, proper lessons, and a teacher who could shape his talent. The next morning, she made a few calls. By evening, she had arranged for a professional piano tutor to visit once a week. The maid felt nervous when she heard this. "Ma'am, you've already done too much," she said softly. "We can't afford," the lady interrupted gently. "This isn't about money. It's about his future. Let me do this, please." Reluctantly, the maid agreed. She trusted the lady's kindness, though part of her still feared the world her son was stepping into, a world far different from theirs. When the piano tutor arrived, he was skeptical. He had taught many students from rich families who showed little discipline or passion. He expected the same here, But when he heard the boy play, his face changed completely. He put his glasses down and said, "How long has he been learning?" "Barely 3 months," the lady said. The tutor stared at the boy in disbelief. 3 months? That's not possible, he muttered. He plays with emotion, not just skill. It's something rare. From then on, the tutor came every week, and each time he left more amazed than before. The boy learned everything quickly, often memorizing pieces after hearing them only once. He began composing small tunes of his own. The lady started recording some of them on her phone, unable to believe such melodies could come from someone so young. One afternoon, she invited a few of her friends over for tea. They were used to hearing her play, but this time she told them there was someone else she wanted them to listen to. When the boy walked into the room, dressed neatly but nervously, a few of the guests looked surprised. Some smiled politely. Others seemed unsure what to expect. "Go ahead," the lady whispered encouragingly. He took a deep breath and started to play one of his own compositions. The room grew quiet. The music was soft at first, then rose gently, carrying emotion that no one could quite describe. Every note seemed to tell a story, of hope, of kindness, of something pure. When he finished, the silence lasted for a few seconds before everyone began clapping. "That was beautiful," one woman said with tears in her eyes. "How old is he?" 10, the lady replied proudly. After the guests left, the boy turned to her and asked, "Did I do all right?" She smiled warmly. "You did more than all right," she said. "You moved them," but not everyone reacted kindly. A few guests later whispered among themselves, surprised that the lady would allow her maid son to perform in her home. They didn't say it out loud, but she could feel the judgment in their eyes. Yet she didn't care. She knew what she had witnessed, real genius wrapped in humility. That night she sat at her piano again, thinking about how the boy's music made her feel. It reminded her of the first time she fell in love with music as a child. That innocent joy, untouched by pride or fame. She realized she wasn't just teaching him, he was teaching her too. As for the boy, he lay awake in his small bed that night, replaying the day's events in his mind. He didn't understand why people clapped or cried when he played. He only knew that when his fingers touched the keys, the world made sense to him. Music was his language and the piano was his voice. Neither he nor the lady knew it yet, but his journey was just beginning. What started as a few gentle lessons in a quiet mansion was about to turn into something far bigger. A story that would soon reach beyond those walls and touch hearts far away. The boy's life was slowly changing, though he hardly noticed it himself. Music had become a part of every day, as natural as breathing. He woke up thinking about melodies, he went to sleep hearing notes in his mind, and in between, he tried to recreate the sounds he imagined on the piano. The mansion had become his world, a place where he felt safe to explore his gift. His teacher visited every week, and with each lesson, the boy improved in ways that surprised everyone. What was most remarkable wasn't just his skill with the piano, but the way he seemed to understand music beyond the notes. He could feel the emotion behind a song, the story it wanted to tell, and then make it his own. The teacher often left the lessons shaking his head in disbelief. "I've never seen a child with this kind of ear," he would whisper to the lady. "He doesn't just play music, he hears it inside." The lady, too, began noticing the changes in him. His confidence grew, though he remained humble. He still spoke softly and rarely bragged, even when praised. But there was a quiet strength in him now, a certainty that he belonged somewhere beyond the small world he had known. One afternoon, she decided to take him to a small recital at the local community hall. It wasn't a big event, just a gathering of music students and a few parents, but she wanted him to see other musicians and experience performing in front of people outside the mansion. The boy was nervous. He had never been on a stage before, and the thought of strangers watching him made his stomach twist. "It's okay to be nervous," she said gently as they walked toward the hall. "Everyone feels that way. Just play the music as you feel it and nothing else matters." He nodded but remained silent. When they entered, the room was filled with children playing violins, flutes, and other pianos. Some of the older students looked confident, while others fumbled with their instruments. The boy watched quietly, observing how they played, how they held themselves, and how the audience reacted. When it was his turn, he stepped onto the small stage. His hey, and trembling slightly. He glanced at the lady in the front row and she smiled at him, nodding reassuringly. He took a deep breath and sat at the piano. For a moment he simply looked at the keys, remembering everything he had learned and everything he felt. Then he began to play. At first the notes were soft, almost hesitant, but slowly he found the rhythm, the melody flowing naturally from his fingers. He played a piece he had composed himself, one that told a story of his small world, his mother, the lady who had believed in him, and the quiet strength he had always carried inside. By the time he finished, the room was silent for a moment, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then applause erupted, loud and warm, filling the hall. The boy blushed, looking down at his hands. I just played what I felt," he murmured to the lady afterward. "That's exactly what you were supposed to do," she said, her voice full of pride, and everyone felt it. From that day on, the boy's reputation began to grow. People in the music community started noticing him. The teacher arranged small opportunities for him to perform at local events and even a few private gatherings for wealthy families who loved music. The boy's humility and talent drew people in. He never demanded attention, but the way he played captivated everyone who heard him. But it wasn't always easy. Sometimes he faced people who didn't understand where he came from. Some families whispered that he didn't belong among children from more privileged backgrounds. Some older students laughed at him quietly, calling him names or pretending he wasn't skilled. The boy felt hurt at first. He didn't understand why his background mattered, why people judged him for who he was instead of what he could do. The lady noticed these changes in him, the moments when he doubted himself. She sat with him one evening after a lesson. "Some people won't see your talent the way I do," she said softly. "They might focus on where you come from instead. But that doesn't matter. Your gift is yours. Never let anyone take that away from you." He listened carefully, nodding. "I don't want to be different," he admitted. "I just want to play." "You are different," she said gently, "but that's not a bad thing. You were born to stand out." Slowly, he began to understand. He realized that people would judge him no matter what, but music could speak for him. When he played, nobody could question who he was or where he came from. The piano became his voice, and through it, he learned to express himself freely. As the boy continued to perform at small events, his confidence grew. He started composing more complex pieces, experimenting with rhythm and harmony. He would sometimes stay at the piano for hours, lost in thought, trying to capture feelings he couldn't explain in words. The lady often watched him quietly, amazed at how natural it was for him to create. She remembered the first day she had invited him to touch the piano, and thought about how far he had come. One afternoon, she decided it was time to let him meet a few people who could help him even more. She contacted a music school known for training talented children and arranged for him to attend a short audition. The maid was nervous when she heard about this. "Are you sure he's ready?" she asked. "He's ready," the lady said confidently. "Talent like this doesn't wait for permission. He just needs someone to guide him." The audition day arrived. The boy's hands shook slightly as he sat in the bright room filled with strangers. But as soon as his fingers touched the keys, he forgot everything else. He played a piece he had composed himself, flowing naturally, telling a story of hope and curiosity. The judges were silent, listening intently. When he finished, they exchanged looks of surprise and admiration. One of them asked softly, "How long has he been learning?" The lady answered proudly, "About 6 months." The judges were stunned. "6 months?" one whispered. "This child is extraordinary." The boy didn't understand the attention. He simply smiled shyly, thinking he had just played the way he always did. But for the lady, this was confirmation. She had always believed in him, and now others were beginning to see it too. As the weeks passed, the school offered him a place to study formally. The maid was anxious. She worried about how her son would be treated in a more competitive environment. But the lady reassured her, promising to stay by his side and help him adjust. She reminded the maid that sometimes the world could be challenging, but it could also reward talent and hard work. The boy began attending the school, and it was a new world for him. Some students were unkind at first, making fun of his background. Some teachers were skeptical, unsure how someone with so little training could succeed. But the boy didn't let it stop him. He played with sincerity and determination, and soon everyone started to notice. His talent could not be denied. Over time, he began to win small competitions, impressing judges and audiences alike. Each performance built his confidence, and each applause reminded him that he belonged in the world he had once only dreamed about. Yet he never forgot where he came from. His mother, the lady who had encouraged him, and the quiet mansion where it all began. At home, he would still visit the piano in the mansion whenever he could. Sometimes he would play for the lady alone, sharing his new compositions. Other times he would improvise, creating new melodies that reflected his emotions and experiences. The lady listened, often moved to tears. She understood that she had not only nurtured a child's talent, but had witnessed the growth of a human being with depth, heart, and soul. One evening, after a particularly long day at school, the boy sat at the piano and began playing softly. The music was gentle at first, then became richer, more emotional. The lady watched silently, realizing that he was no longer the shy boy who had first touched the keys out of curiosity. He was now a young musician, confident, expressive, and full of potential. "You've grown so much," she whispered. "I knew you had something special, but even I didn't imagine this." The boy smiled shyly. "I just like to play," he said. But she could see the pride in his eyes, a quiet pride that came from knowing he had worked hard and had been recognized for his gift. It was in these quiet moments that she realized something important. Talent alone was not enough. It was belief, encouragement, and love that made it possible for someone to shine. She had given him the chance, and he had taken it. But more than that, he had embraced it fully. As night fell, the boy left the piano and sat by the window, looking out at the dark streets below. He thought about the journey so far, the mansion, the lady, his mother, the teacher, and the small audience that had first listened to him play. He felt a sense of gratitude he could not put into words. Music had given him a voice, a purpose, and a path forward. The lady watched him from behind, smiling quietly. She knew that this was only the beginning. The boy's journey would take him far beyond their small world, to places neither of them could yet imagine. But for now, she was content to watch, to guide, and to listen, knowing that she had helped a rare gift find its wings. And the boy, though unaware of the full journey ahead, was ready. His heart was open, his hands were skilled, and his spirit was determined. Music had become his life, and he was prepared to let it lead him wherever it would go. Life at the music school was very different from anything the boy had experienced before. The classrooms were large and filled with shiny instruments, and every corner of the building seemed to hum with music. There were students from families who could afford private lessons, who had tutors and practice rooms at home. The boy often felt out of place at first. He didn't have fancy instruments at home or a room to practice quietly, and sometimes he overheard students whispering about him. He noticed how they looked at him, the clothes he wore, the way he spoke, the small, careful gestures he made. Some of them laughed quietly when he made mistakes, and it stung. He began to wonder if he truly belonged there. Some nights he would go back to the mansion and sit quietly by the piano, playing slowly, trying to calm his nerves. The music was always there, constant and comforting, even when the outside world felt cold. The lady noticed his unease. One afternoon, she sat beside him as he practiced a new piece. "Do you feel nervous?" she asked softly. "Yes," he admitted, looking down at the keys. "They think I don't belong here. They say I'm not like them." She took his hand gently. "Being different doesn't mean you don't belong," she said. "You're here because you have something they don't, a gift that comes from inside you. Work hard, play honestly, and no one can take that away." Her words comforted him, but it was not easy. The first few months were a challenge. Some teachers doubted his ability to keep up with the lessons. Some students acted cold or dismissive. At times, the boy felt frustrated, but he never gave up. Every day he returned to the piano, practicing until his fingers ached, playing pieces over and over until the music came alive in his hands. Slowly, things began to change. The boy's talent was undeniable. He played pieces that others struggled to master, and his compositions began to attract attention. Teachers who had doubted him started to watch quietly, listening to the way he interpreted every note. He had a way of making music speak, of conveying emotion that was impossible to ignore. One day, the school organized a small recital for the students. The boy was nervous but excited. He had chosen a piece he had been working on for weeks, a composition that was soft at first, then built into something strong and too powerful. He took a deep breath and began to play. The music filled the room, capturing the attention of every listener. His fingers danced across the keys, telling a story that words could never express. When he finished, the applause was immediate and loud. Students and teachers alike were impressed, and some came forward to congratulate him. Even the ones who had been skeptical or dismissive nodded in respect. The boy blushed, looking down at his hands. He didn't understand why everyone was so amazed. To him, he had just played what he felt, but the lady knew. She had seen the transformation in him. The boy who had once been shy and uncertain now stood taller, his confidence growing with every note. Music had given him a voice, and the world was beginning to listen. As he continued his studies, the boy faced other challenges too. Some competitions were difficult, with older students who had years of formal training. Sometimes he didn't win, and it hurt. He would return to the piano, trying to understand what went wrong, practicing harder and longer. The lady and his mother encouraged him, reminding him that talent alone was not enough. Persistence, practice, and patience were just as important. One afternoon, his teacher took him aside. "I want to introduce you to a small music gathering in the city," he said. "There will be a few professional musicians there. I think it's time they hear you play." The boy's heart raced. He had never performed for professional musicians before. What if they didn't like him? What if he made a mistake? But the lady squeezed his hand. "You are ready," she said. "Trust yourself. Play from your heart and they will feel it." At the gathering, the boy stepped onto the stage, small but determined. The room was filled with people he had never met, some with stern faces and critical eyes. He took a deep breath and began to play. Slowly, the music filled the room, soft at first, then growing with emotion and strength. The musicians watched him in silence, their expressions changing from curiosity to surprise, then to admiration. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. People came forward to congratulate him, some even asking to see his compositions. The boy smiled shyly, still trying to understand what had just happened. The lady stood nearby, tears in her eyes, knowing that this moment would mark a turning point. From that day, the boy began to receive invitations to perform at more events. Each performance gave him more confidence, and slowly, he started to understand the impact his music could have on people. He was no longer just playing for himself or the lady. He was playing for an audience that could feel the emotions in every note. Yet life was not without its struggles. The boy often missed his mother and the quiet moments at the mansion. He sometimes felt lonely among students who came from wealthier backgrounds and had different experiences. But the piano was always there, a constant friend and guide. When he played, he remembered the mansion, the lady, and his mother, and it reminded him of why he had started. One evening, after a particularly long practice, he sat quietly at the piano playing a slow, soft melody. The lady entered quietly, listening. She could hear the boy pouring his heart into every note, and she smiled. "You have come so far," she whispered. "I knew you could do this, but even I didn't imagine how far you would go." The boy looked up. "I just play," he said softly. "I don't know if it matters." "It matters more than you know," she said. "You have the power to touch people, to make them feel something they couldn't feel otherwise. That is a rare gift." As he continued to play, he began to experiment more. He combined melodies, added rhythms, and explored sounds he had never tried before. His music became a reflection of his journey, the struggles, the hopes, the quiet moments of joy. Every note told a story, and people who listened felt it deeply. The lady began to arrange more opportunities for him, reaching out to musicians and music teachers she knew. She wanted the boy to have guidance, to learn from people who could help him refine his skill. Slowly, his world expanded beyond the mansion and the school. He began to travel to small cities, performing in front of audiences that ranged from a handful of people to crowded halls. Each time he felt nervous at first, but when his fingers touched the keys, everything else disappeared. At home, the boy continued to compose new pieces. He wrote music for his mother, for the lady, and sometimes for himself. Each composition was different, reflecting his feelings and experiences. Some were happy and light, others deep and serious, but all of them carried the same emotion, a reflection of his soul. The lady often reminded him, "Music is not just about notes. It's about how it makes people feel. If you can make them feel, you have done your job." The boy took her words to heart. He played not to impress, not to compete, but to express. And that is why his music began to stand out. People listened, not just to the notes, but to the story behind them. They could feel his journey, his struggles, and his joy. One day, the boy's teacher brought him to a local radio station. They wanted to record a short performance just to see how the boy sounded outside of the classroom. The boy was nervous, sitting in the bright studio, headphones covering his ears. But when he started to play, the sound of the piano filled the room, soft and steady, then rising with emotion. The technicians listened quietly, and when he finished, they clapped, amazed at the depth and feeling of his music. The lady smiled proudly. She knew that soon the boy's music would reach far beyond the small circles of the mansion and the school. The world was ready to listen, and he was ready to play. Yet she also knew that fame and recognition could be difficult. She reminded him often to stay humble, to remember where he came from, and to always play from the heart. The boy listened, absorbing her wisdom while continuing to grow and explore his gift. At night, he would sit by the window thinking about the journey so far. From the first time he had touched the keys to his performances in front of strangers, he had grown not just as a musician, but as a person. He had learned about patience, courage, and the power of belief. Music had given him a voice, but it had also taught him about life. The boy knew the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more performances, and more moments of doubt. But he also knew he had something no one could take from him: the love of music and the belief that he could achieve something extraordinary. And as he played softly in the quiet of the night, the lady listened, knowing that this boy, once a shy child who had only watched her play, was now on the path to becoming a musician who could touch hearts around the world. The boy's journey had reached a point that felt almost unreal. Years had passed since he first touched the piano in the quiet mansion, timid and curious, and now he was standing in places he had never imagined. His music had carried him beyond the walls of his school, beyond the familiar streets of his neighborhood, and into halls where audiences waited to hear every note. And yet, even as the applause rang in his ears, he remembered the first time someone had invited him to press a key. He had grown taller, stronger, and more confident, but his heart remained humble. He never played to show off, never played to compete. He played because music was part of him. Every time he sat at the piano, whether on a grand stage or in a small room, he poured himself into the music, telling stories that could not be told with words alone. The lady who had first encouraged him watched closely as he prepared for one of the most important performances of his life. She had helped him navigate countless opportunities, but this one was different. A renowned orchestra conductor had invited him to perform with a full orchestra at a prestigious concert hall. It was a dream come true, but it also brought nerves that the boy had never felt before. He sat quietly backstage, glancing at the rows of chairs stretching far ahead, filled with people waiting for music. The orchestra members tuned their instruments, and the soft hum of their preparation filled the room. The boy's fingers itched to touch the keys, but he took deep breaths, reminding himself of everything he had learned. The lady placed her hand on his shoulder. "Remember," she said softly, "you don't have to be perfect. Play from your heart. That is all anyone can ever ask." He nodded, trying to steady the fluttering in his chest. He thought about his mother, who had always worked tirelessly to provide for him, who had never stopped believing in his dreams even when the world seemed harsh. He thought about the first day at the mansion, when he had only dared to press a key out of curiosity. And he thought about all the people who had helped him along the way: his teacher, the tutor, the lady who had encouraged him without judgment. When his name was announced, he walked onto the stage, the lights bright and the audience silent in expectation. He approached the grand piano at the center, sitting on the bench and feeling the smooth surface under his fingers. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the familiar rhythm of his heartbeat guide him. Then he began to play. The music started softly, almost tentatively, and then it grew, flowing naturally, full of emotion and life. Each note carried the weight of his journey: the struggles, the doubts, the joy, the hope. The orchestra followed His lead, the instruments blending with his piano, creating a sound that filled the hall and touched every listener. People in the audience felt something rare. They were not just hearing a child play. They were experiencing a story, a life and a heart through music. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. Some wiped away tears quietly, moved by the honesty and purity of the performance. When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. It was a sound that seemed to shake the very walls, a roar of appreciation and admiration. The boy looked up, stunned by the magnitude of it. For a moment he felt disbelief. Could this really be happening? But then he caught sight of the lady in the front row, smiling proudly, tears glistening in her eyes. He understood then that this moment was not just his own. It belonged to everyone who had helped him, guided him, and believed in him when no one else had. After the concert, people approached him, offering congratulations and praise. Musicians asked him questions about his compositions, and teachers admired the depth of his interpretation. But the boy remained humble, answering simply, "I just play what I feel." And that was the truth. In the days that followed, invitations began to pour in. More concerts, more performances, more opportunities to share his gift. The boy traveled to different cities, performing for audiences who were eager to hear his music. Each performance strengthened his confidence and refined his skills, but he never lost the simplicity that had made his music so special. He played for the love of it, and that love resonated with everyone who listened. Despite the growing fame, he remained grounded. He visited his mother often, helping her with small tasks and sharing stories of his travels. He never forgot where he came from, the sacrifices she had made, and the quiet strength that had carried him to this point. He also returned to the mansion regularly, playing for the lady who had first believed in him. Those sessions were never about practice alone. They were about connection, gratitude, and remembering the path that had brought him here. One evening, after a long day of rehearsals, he sat at the piano in the mansion, composing a new piece. It was inspired by his journey, the first key he had pressed, the lessons he had learned, the people who had guided him, and the emotions he had experienced along the way. He played softly at first, then let the music grow, filling the room with a warmth that seemed to embrace everyone present. The lady listened quietly, tears running down her cheeks. She realized that she had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the growth of a talented musician, but the growth of a human being who had learned kindness, humility, and perseverance through his gift. "You've become more than I ever imagined," she whispered. "You've touched the hearts of so many, and you've never forgotten where you came from. That is your true strength." The boy paused, looking up at her. "I just want to play," he said softly. But she knew he had already achieved something much greater. He had become a symbol of hope, proof that talent could emerge from anywhere, and that with encouragement and belief, even the quietest hearts could shine. In the following months, his fame continued to grow. He performed in concert halls, collaborated with orchestras, and shared his music in recordings that reached listeners far beyond his hometown. Yet through it all, he remained true to himself. He never let fame change his character, never allowed pride to cloud his humility. He remembered the first time someone had believed in him and carried that belief in his heart wherever he went. The boy also began teaching younger children who showed an interest in music, sharing the same kindness and encouragement that had been given to him. He would sit with them patiently, showing them the keys, listening to their attempts, and praising their efforts. He wanted them to understand that music was not just about skill, but about feeling, connection, and expression. One day his mother quietly watched him with the students. She felt a swell of pride and relief. Her son had achieved so much, yet he remained compassionate, gentle, and grounded. She realized that his journey had been about more than music. It had been about growing into a remarkable human being. The lady who had first invited him to the piano often reflected on their journey together. She had simply offered an opportunity, a kind word, and a space to explore, and it had changed everything. The boy had taken that small chance and transformed it into something extraordinary. She often told herself that it was proof of the power of encouragement, love, and belief, small gestures that could create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine. Years later, the boy returned to the mansion for a private concert. The music flowed through the familiar rooms, filling every corner with memories and emotion. The lady listened quietly, knowing that this was the culmination of years of growth, struggle, and triumph. The boy's fingers danced across the keys, weaving melodies that told the story of his life, from the timid child who had first pressed a key out of curiosity to the accomplished musician who now shared his gift with the world. When the final note echoed and faded, the room was silent for a moment, and then applause filled the space. The boy stood bowing humbly, Tears filled the lady's eyes as she clapped, knowing that she had witnessed something rare and beautiful, a dream realized, a life transformed, and a heart that had remained true. The boy approached her and his mother, kneeling slightly in gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly, "for believing in me when I didn't even know I could." The lady smiled, her heart full. "No, thank you," she whispered. "You have given us something even more beautiful than music. You have shown us the power of hope, patience, and the human spirit." And in that quiet moment, the boy realized that his journey had never truly been about fame or recognition. It had been about love, kindness, and the courage to explore a gift he had been given. The piano had been his companion, his teacher and his voice, and through it, he had discovered not only his talent but himself. He continued to play for the rest of his life, sharing music that touched hearts, inspired dreams, and reminded people everywhere that greatness could come from the most unexpected places. And through it all, he never forgot the small mansion, the lady who had believed in him, and the first key he had ever pressed, a simple gesture that had changed everything. The boy, now a young man, had become a musician the world would remember, but more importantly, he had become a human being who understood that true greatness comes not from skill alone, but from heart, humility, and the courage to embrace one's own gift. And that perhaps was the most beautiful music of all.